In my 35 years on the bench in Providence, Rhode Island, I've watched people walk into my courtroom with their shoulders high and their hearts hiding low. If this story touches your heart, leave a comment right now, my friends, because what I'm about to tell you began with confidence and ended in tears. And subscribe to see more stories from my courtroom, because the lesson in this one is bigger than any parking ticket. It was an ordinary morning in municipal court. The fluorescent lights hummed. The clerk read names like a metronome. The gallery was packed with working people, grandparents, young parents bouncing a baby on their knee, and a few folks who looked like they hadn't slept. Inspector Quinn stood where he always stands, calm and watchful. I've said it 1,000 times. Quinn doesn't just see violations, he sees people. The next file on my bench looked simple. A double parking citation, $85, downtown Providence. But I've been doing this for 35 years, and I've learned that simple is usually the first lie a case tells you. Dominic Russo, the clerk called. A man stepped forward like he was walking onto a stage, mid-30s, clean haircut, a jacket that fit him just right. He carried a folder like a briefcase and wore a smile that said, "I came here to win." He didn't look scared. He looked entertained. I looked at him and thought, what are you so sure of? Before we go any further, hit that like button if you believe in second chances, because I want you to stay with me until the end, and tell me if you would have done what I did. I said, "Good morning, sir." "Morning, Judge," he answered. His voice was steady, too steady. I picked up the ticket. "You're charged with double parking on Westminster Street at 8:17 a.m. How do you plead?" "Not responsible," he said quickly. "Not responsible." 2 words people think are magic. I didn't argue, I just watched him. His chin stayed up, but his eyes didn't quite settle. They flicked to the prosecutor, to Quinn, to the gallery, like he was measuring the room. I said, "Tell me what happened." He opened the folder and began like he'd rehearsed it. "I own a small installation business. I was delivering equipment to a customer. I pulled up, hazards on, jumped out, and I'm telling you, Judge, it was less than a minute. I come back and the officer is already printing the ticket like I'm some criminal." The prosecutor glanced at the notes. "Officer states the vehicle was observed for approximately 5 minutes. Dominic gave a little laugh. 5 minutes? Come on. Let me ask you something. Why are you laughing?" He stopped. "Because it's ridiculous." I nodded. "Double parking isn't ridiculous to the mother behind you who's late for work. It isn't ridiculous to an ambulance trying to get through." He held his hands up. "I understand. I'm not a bad guy. I'm just not paying for something I didn't do." That's a sentence I hear all day long. I said, "Do you have evidence?" He slid a paper forward. "Invoice, appointment time, address." I read it. An address close by. An appointment window starting at 8. I looked back up. "This shows you had a job. It doesn't show where the van was parked." He leaned in, still confident. "Judge, with respect, the officer wanted a quota. I was the easiest target." The room stirred. People love a good fight, especially when it sounds like the little guy versus the system. But I've been doing this long enough to know that sometimes the fight is a distraction from something deeper. I said calmly, "Mr. Russo, in this courtroom you can challenge the ticket, but don't insult the process. You're doing the right thing coming here, and I'm going to listen to you." That softened him for half a second. Then his confidence came back. "Thank you, Judge. That's all I'm asking." I asked to see his phone photo. He had one picture of a white van with hazards on. I squinted. No street sign, no time stamp, nothing that could anchor it. I handed it back and said, "I can't rely on this." His jaw tightened. "So it's my word against his." I said, "It's your word against the evidence." He opened his mouth to fire back. Then I noticed his hand. It was shaking. Not the shake of anger, the shake of effort. He curled his fingers around the folder like he needed something solid. I leaned forward. "Mr. Russo, let me ask you something. Why does this $85 feel like the end of the world to you?" He blinked hard, like I'd stepped into a room he didn't want opened. He said, "Because it's always like this." "Like what?" I asked. He swallowed. "You do everything right, and you still get hit." I waited. Silence is a tool in court. It gives the truth space. He stared at the floor, and when he looked back up, the smile was gone. He said, "Judge, I'm fighting for my life, and I'm tired of getting hit." If you're still listening, my friends, subscribe right now, because what he pulled out next changed the mood of that whole courtroom in 1 second. His confidence melted. He opened the folder again, but now his hands fumbled. Papers slid wrong. His breathing got shallow. He held up a statement from Rhode Island Hospital. Oncology. I've read thousands of documents. I can read a medical bill the way a priest reads a confession. When I saw the dates, my stomach dropped. Treatments scheduled, lab work, infusions, and an amount due that looked impossible. I looked at him and said softly, "Is this yours?" He nodded once. The prosecutor stopped flipping pages. Quinn's eyes narrowed with concern. Dominic said, "Stage 3 lymphoma." The gallery went so quiet you could hear the air system click on. I felt my throat tighten. I thought of my father, an immigrant who worked with his hands in Providence, who believed you didn't complain, you just provided. I said, "God bless you." He shook his head like the words burned. "Please don't say that." "Why?" I asked. His voice cracked. "When people say it, it sounds like they're already writing me off." That broke my heart. I paused, because judges aren't supposed to pause for feelings, but human beings do. I said, "Mr. Russo, nobody in this courtroom is writing you off. Not today." He looked away fast, embarrassed. I asked, "Do you have a family?" "Wife," he said, "2 kids." "How old?" 8 and 11. 8 and 11. Those are the ages where children still think their parents are invincible. Dominic stared at the ticket like it was insulting him personally. "I can't miss work, Judge. The treatment costs. The business barely survives when I'm down, so I work through it." "Even on chemo days?" I asked. He gave a bitter laugh. "Chemo days, I try to sleep it off in the van between jobs." I saw people in the gallery wiping their eyes, quietly, like they didn't want anyone to notice. Let me tell you something, my friends. The strongest people don't always look strong. Sometimes strength looks like showing up when your body is begging you not to. If you've ever had to keep going when you were scared, leave a comment with a prayer or a good thought. It matters. I turned back to the facts. "All right, Mr. Russo, I'm sorry you're sick, but I still have to decide the case. Were you double parked?" He closed his eyes. That confident man who walked in was gone. In his place was someone stripped down to the truth. He whispered, "Yes." The gallery murmured. I said, "So you were double parked?" He nodded, tears starting. "I was unloading. I thought I could beat the clock. I thought I could get away with it." I respected that honesty. I said, "The truth has a way of making room for mercy." He wiped his face, angry at himself for crying. I asked, "Where were you unloading?" He slid the invoice again. "An apartment building, installing a railing for an old man who fell." I read the name on the invoice, Salvatore De Luca. De Luca, an Italian name. I'm Italian-American. My parents came here with nothing but faith and pride. Names like that in Providence feel like family. I looked at Inspector Quinn. He gave me a look that said, "Judge, you're going to want to hear this." I said, "Inspector, would you check something for me, please?" Quinn nodded and stepped out. Dominic watched him, confused. "Judge, what's going on?" I said, "Sometimes Providence is smaller than you think." I asked Dominic, "Do your kids know you're sick?" He shook his head. "Not the word. They just know I'm tired. They call it medicine days." I felt that in my chest. I said, "You love them?" He looked up, eyes wet. "More than anything." "Then listen to me," I said. "They don't need a perfect father. They need a present father." That's something I wish every parent could hear. The prosecutor cleared his throat gently, like he wanted to help without taking over. "Judge, we can consider a reduction if warranted." I nodded. "I appreciate that." But then I asked the question that mattered. "Mr. Russo, why did you walk in here so confident?" He laughed through tears. "Because if I don't act confident, I fall apart." And right then, I understood. Confidence wasn't arrogance. It was survival. Before I tell you what Inspector Quinn discovered, hit that like button if you believe a courtroom can be a place of dignity, not just punishment. Quinn returned with a small note in his hand. His face was different, softer. He walked to the bench and spoke quietly. I read the note. Salvatore De Luca was 91 years old, and he was the father of a longtime courthouse employee sitting in the gallery. I lifted my eyes. A woman stood up slowly, hand over her mouth. Her shoulders were shaking. I said, "Ma'am, are you Mr. De Luca's daughter?" She nodded, tears spilling. "Yes, Judge." Dominic turned around. His face drained of color. The woman took a breath like she'd been holding it for weeks. "My father told me about him," she said, pointing at Dominic. "He said the young man who installed the railing treated him like a father." Dominic whispered, "I didn't." She held up her hand. "Please, my father is proud. He hates taking help. But he called me that night and said, 'That boy, he made me feel human again.'" I felt my eyes burn. I had to blink. I'm a judge, but I'm also a son. I asked Dominic, "Did you charge him full price?" He looked down. "No." "Why not?" He swallowed. Because he reminded me of my father, and because I could tell he didn't have it. The woman's voice broke. My father wrote him a letter. Dominic looked up, stunned. A letter? She pulled an envelope from her purse. It was worn like it had been carried for comfort. She looked at me. May I give it to him? I said. Yes, please. She walked forward slowly. The bailiff watched, but I knew there was no danger here. Only grace. Dominic took the envelope with both hands. His fingers trembled. He opened it like it might explode. His eyes moved across the page. At first he held himself together. Then his face crumpled. He started to sob. Not polite tears, not a sniffle. A grown man in open court, sobbing like he'd been holding his breath for a year. The gallery stayed silent, but I saw heads bow. I saw people wiping cheeks. I saw Quinn stare straight ahead, jaw tight. I asked gently, "What does it say?" Dominic tried to speak. He couldn't. The daughter spoke softly, almost like reading a prayer. It says, to the young man with the tired eyes, "You gave me a railing, but you also gave me dignity. If you ever need a hand, you have mine." My throat tightened. Let me tell you something, my friends. Dignity is not a luxury. It's a need. If you believe that, share this story with someone who thinks court is only about fines. Now I had to make a decision. The law was clear. The ticket was valid. He admitted it. But justice is not just a calculator. Justice is a human being looking at another human being and asking, what will make this right? I said, Mr. Russo, I'm finding you responsible. He flinched. I held up my hand. But listen to me. He looked up, eyes swollen. I said, the fine is $85. I'm reducing it to $10. A wave moved through the room. Dominic blinked like he hadn't heard right. $10? Yes, I said. Because you told the truth when it mattered, because you're trying to hold your family together, and because you showed kindness to a man who needed it. I could hear the relief in his breathing, like his lungs finally remembered how to work. But my heart wasn't done. I asked, are you insured? He shook his head. I lost it. Premiums went up. I'm paying what I can. I nodded. I understand. I looked at the prosecutor. He nodded too, like he understood that $10 wasn't the point. The point was the message. I said, Mr. Russo, you're not paying today. He stared at me. I'm not? No, I said. You come back in 3 months. We'll see how you're doing. If you're still in treatment, we'll talk again. Dominic's mouth opened and closed. No words came. I said quietly, take care of yourself. And then I added, what am I going to do with you? I'm going to ask you to do something for me. He looked up. I said, park legally, every time. Not because of the ticket, because your kids are watching the man you are. Don't teach them that rules are only for other people. He nodded hard. Yes, Judge, I promise. That's accountability. If you've ever needed someone to correct you without crushing you, hit that like button. That's the kind of justice I try to practice. The daughter stepped closer again. Judge, may I say one more thing? Of course, I said. She looked at Dominic. My father wants to help you. He's stubborn, but he insisted. He said, if I can hold on to a railing, maybe he can hold on to me. Dominic covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. He wasn't crying about the $10. He was crying because, for the first time in a long time, someone offered him a hand without making him feel small. I said, Mr. Russo, sometimes pride keeps us alive, but sometimes pride keeps us alone. He nodded behind his hands. I looked at him and said, you're a good person. Don't let fear turn you into a hard person. That's another line I hope people remember. Dominic lowered his hands. His eyes were red, but there was light in them now. He turned to the daughter. Please tell your father thank you. Tell him I'll come see him when I can. She nodded, crying. I will. Dominic gathered his papers and stood there like he didn't know how to leave. So I spoke to him the way my father would have spoken to me. I said, let me ask you something. When you're in that van, alone, and you feel the panic coming, who do you call? He shook his head. Nobody. I said, that's going to change. He looked up. I pointed gently toward the gallery. You see all these people? They're strangers, but they're rooting for you. Don't insult them by carrying it alone. He let out a breath that sounded like surrender, and then, like a man finally admitting defeat to kindness, he said, okay. The clerk called the next case, but nobody moved. Even the prosecutor sat still for a moment. I could feel the courtroom holding on to the moment like it was warm. Dominic turned to go, and I said, Mr. Russo. He stopped. I said, the strongest people aren't the ones who never cry. The strongest people are the ones who keep loving while they're afraid. He nodded, crying again, but this time he didn't fight it. He walked out quieter than he came in. That day, after the docket ended, I sat back and thought about my parents. They came to this country with hope and worry in the same suitcase. They taught me to work hard, to respect the rules, and to remember that behind every mistake is a human being trying to get home. I also thought about my own health journey, how life can change in a phone call, how gratitude becomes a discipline. When you've been given more days than you expected, you don't waste them being cruel. If you're still watching, my friends, subscribe, because these stories aren't really about court. They're about life. 3 months later, Dominic came back. He didn't walk in confident this time. He walked in careful. He wore the same jacket, but it hung looser on his frame. His cheeks were thinner, but his eyes had a steadiness that wasn't performance. I said, "Mr. Russo, how are you?" He swallowed. "Judge, I'm still here." The gallery, different people than before, still reacted. Because I'm still here is a victory. He handed up a paper from his doctor. The treatment was working. Not finished, but working. I looked at it and said, "God bless you." This time he didn't flinch. He said, "Thank you, Judge." I asked, "How's your family?" He smiled a little. "My kids know now, not everything, but they know I'm fighting, and they wrote me little notes for medicine days." My throat tightened again. He added, "And I went to see Mr. DeLuca." I looked at the daughter in the gallery. She was there again, smiling through tears. Dominic said, "He made me sit. He fed me. He told me stories about Providence when he was a boy, and he said, 'You're not allowed to disappear on me.'" I laughed softly. "That sounds like an Italian elder." Dominic nodded. "Yes, Judge." I said, "So tell me, have you been parking legally?" He laughed for real. "Yes, I park so far away now, I'm getting exercise." The room laughed with him. And laughter in a courtroom is one of my favorite sounds. It means people are breathing again. I picked up the old file. "You still owe $10. He reached into his wallet immediately. "I have it." I held up my hand. "No." He froze. I looked at him and said, "Mr. Russo, you paid more than $10 already." He stared. "I did?" "Yes," I said. "You paid with honesty. You paid with humility. You paid by letting people love you." I paused. Then I said, "Case dismissed." He didn't move, like his brain couldn't translate it. The daughter gasped. Quinn gave me a look that said, "Judge, that's the right ending." Dominic's face crumpled again. Tears rolled down, but his smile stayed. He said, "Judge." "Why?" I said, "Because mercy is not ignoring the law. Mercy is using the law to lift a person when they're trying to stand." That's a line I've learned the hard way. Dominic nodded, crying. "Thank you." I said, "No, thank you for reminding everyone in here that bravery isn't loud. Before you go, my friends, share this with someone who needs hope, and hit that like button if you believe people can change when they're treated like they matter." Dominic turned to leave, and I called him back one last time. I said, "Let me ask you something. What are you going to do when this is over?" He wiped his face. "I'm going to take my kids to the beach. I keep promising." I smiled. "Good. Keep that promise." He nodded. "I will." And he walked out. Afterward, I looked at the bench, at the seal of the court, at the empty chairs where fear sits all day. I thought, what is justice if it doesn't leave room for a person's story? Let me tell you something, my friends. I try to treat people the way I'd want to be treated, not because I'm soft, because life is hard enough. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. Would you have reduced the fine? Would you have dismissed it? Would you have held firm on the full amount? Subscribe to see more stories from my courtroom, because tomorrow another confident walk will come through that door and we'll find out what's hiding underneath. God bless you. Take care of yourself.